Welcome back to the BetCanada channel. Katie Caldwell and Jeff Lloyd here with you. Jeff, the news that Kansas City fans have been waiting for. So the Chiefs and Trey Smith, they get a long-term deal done, agreed to a 4-year, $92 million extension. He's now the highest paid guard in NFL history. What does this move tell you about where the team is at right now, coming off obviously a really tough Super Bowl loss? It looks like they're building the right way, starting in the trenches.
The Chiefs, and this was a move, and it's always funny because, like, you get some of these moves and everybody kind of gets antsy, like, oh, is it not? The Chiefs know what's working for them. Trust me, they truly know what's working for them.
They've been there
Um,
and they've
yeah,
stayed there up at
exactly.
that mountaintop.
Now, Trey Smith, who was a fantastic prospect coming out of Tennessee, there were maybe questions about his knees, and it shows you just how tricky and unfortunately sad sometimes that the draft process can be. Here was a guy that everybody considered an all-world talent and still
Mhm.
went in the fifth round. Chiefs, you don't draft a guard in the fifth round and he becomes an immediate starter and becomes an immediate impact player every day. But obviously, this was a player that had that resume. The Chiefs, and what allows Patrick to be so electric is the Chiefs are extremely, extremely strong up front between their guards
Yeah.
and their center. So when the pressure's not coming from that way, Patrick essentially only has to worry about the pressure that's coming on from the outside, which allows him either
Mhm.
to A, step up into the pocket, step up around the outside rushers, and then he can either roll to his right, roll to his left. And that's where you get obviously all those, little easy bounces over to Kelsey or to the running back. But I think the thing that, probably isn't talked about enough for the Chiefs is that the run game is quietly important and is very quietly successful for them. I mean, Mahomes gets all the accolades, of course, but now Kareem Hunt, who in 2023 for the Browns, had production, but was running for less than 4 yards per carry. Last year, they ran into the incident, obviously, where they lost their top running back for a while, brought in Kareem Hunt.
Mhm.
Kareem Hunt put up a bunch of production for them. It was over 800 total yards, lots of touchdowns. And you just showed that basically it's not necessarily the guy toting the rock. It's the guy just basically picking up what the offensive line has made available for
Yep.
him. And that's where a guy like Smith has been integral. But the Chiefs know what the pillars of this, team is. It's
Mhm.
Patrick. Obviously, it's Chris Jones, of course. It's Kelsey, of course. Trey Smith is now on that level for this team as well. I'm sure there's a lot of NFL front offices right now that are not thrilled with the amount of money that the Chiefs just threw at an interior offensive lineman
Yep.
because basically he got offensive tackle money.
Yeah.
So now the negotiating power, obviously, for the next guards to come up for contract extensions. Well, we'd like to be in that area. We'd like to be in that
Yeah.
range. And if you're the Chiefs, obviously you don't care about anybody else. You're going to do what's best for your own business. And as they just, and the Chiefs, you got to think that they probably think, it's another maybe 2-3 years at the way they look right now,
Mhm.
because every team you're going to look at yourself, today, tomorrow, 2 years down the road. And the Chiefs, they understand that everybody's biting at the heels.
Yeah.
Everybody is coming after them. Everybody's goal in the AFC every offseason is what can we do to get our roster better to be in
Mhm.
position to jump the Kansas City Chiefs. So the Chiefs can't lose a pillar like Trey Smith. Not to say anybody in the league is irreplaceable, but,
Mhm.
they don't know what would be that future replacement for Trey Smith. So it was that important for them to get this done. It certainly aids to their running game as much as it aids to their passing game. And,
Mhm.
look, it's the obvious right now. As we talk about some of these teams trying to get to the, obviously the Super Bowl to, basically cement their own legacy, the Chiefs, this is the standard. If it's not the
Yep.
Super Bowl, what are we doing this for? And, they can play that role, obviously, because they have been there so often. And, not other teams do. It's just trying to find success. For the Chiefs, what is successful or what is not is whether or not we went to the Super Bowl.
Quick pause. If you haven't subscribed to the BetCanada YouTube channel, you can do so below. It's free and it helps support our channel so we can keep bringing you NFL and NHL content. Now, back to the show. Yeah, yeah, they're kind of giving the like early 2000s Detroit Red Wings to me, where I think they had made the playoffs in 19 straight seasons and you just knew they were always going to be there. They were always going to be a part of it. They have a bit of that energy to me where I'll believe they're not the division winner when I see it. Like we know that it's going to happen one day where someone else will take over. We've talked about this in our division previews. What does this tell us about how today's NFL and how the premium position of guard has really changed. Like I feel like we're seeing it more in the draft. We're seeing it more with signings where teams are realizing like this is where our team starts is in the trenches and you want to protect your quarterback and you want to have a good run game. I feel like this move, especially now he's the highest paid guard in NFL history, we are starting to see it where teams are really, really prioritizing this position. What does that tell you about today's NFL with how teams are prioritizing this?
Well, this is one where, I'm in this line of thinking, of where guards are important because, for years, you look at what the difference a team with a really good interior pass rush defensively can do.
Yeah.
And it's so much shorter of a path for a defensive tackle to get in there and ruin the day for your quarterback. So that's why for
Yeah.
me, ideally, you want that supreme edge rusher, of course, but you also want somebody who can consistently get pass rush from the interior, you know, the Aaron Donalds of the world. And I think because of a
Mhm.
guy like Aaron Donald, you are getting guys now who are more developed as pass rushers on the interior. Most of the time, that wasn't the way coming out of college. They were good run stuffers, and teams said, okay, well, the athleticism checks out. We'll teach them the pass rush part. But now the interior pass rush level in the NFL has grown so much that obviously having your center, having your guards be really solid players is something that it's just essential now because I mean when you have a 325-pound defensive tackle, who's basically just got to take three strides and basically can just ruin the day for your offense, possibly crumble and crush your quarterback, it's become a more important part of the league, of the game overall. And look, offensive tackle play is always going to be extremely important just due to the fact that the outside edge rushers seem to get more and more athletic with each passing year. Oh my God, how can anybody be more athletic than this? And then a year later, there's a guy who just at 275 pounds, he's got a 40-inch vertical. He runs a 4 4
Yeah.
40. He benches 25, 30 times. And, you feel he was built in a lab. But the
Yeah.
evolution of the defensive line on the interior over the years has led to the more importance and bigger emphasis being put it on making sure you have high quality interior offensive linemen, and then now
Mhm.
all of a sudden they have to be paid accordingly. Look, the cap is always going to rise within the NFL. More money is going to be created for these teams to use and disperse at their disposal. You get ebbs and flows sometimes. Just a
Mhm.
couple of years ago, we had running backs trying to do Zoom calls because they felt they were being disrespected about how they were being paid in the league.
Yeah.
2 years later, Saquon Barkley all of a sudden is getting a huge amount of money. He was one of those
Mhm.
guys a couple of years ago that was part of those discussions of, I think we're being disrespected. Interior offensive linemen, they weren't holding Zoom calls, but they were definitely probably being paid disrespectfully for a while.
Mhm.
Now, as the money continues to create and the growth, and obviously, the more importance that has been placed upon interior defensive line play, it just makes the most sense, obviously, that now all of a sudden interior offensive line play has to be considered on that same level as well.
Mm. Does this tell us anything about how the Chiefs view their own championship window? Because it feels like a lot of teams, they've done such a great job at continuity, especially with like their coaching staff. Like, I feel like Spags could be a head coach anywhere in the NFL right now, but they've done such a good job at retaining their players. Does this tell us anything about how they view that window? Because it feels like they're looking at it going, oh, this ain't closed yet.
And I don't think there's really a reason you should. Look, with Patrick Mahomes, you figure you've got minimum 5 seasons, and who knows how long a guy like Pat wants to go.
Yeah.
Is it,
Or
do I
can
want to
go.
chase? Yes, do I want to chase these records?
Hmm.
And I mean, you look at some of these numbers that are out there as far as records for touchdown passes, yards thrown. And I think Pat, at this point in his career, is probably more like, well, I'd like to be a guy that has 4, possibly 5 Super Bowl rings. I
Hmm.
don't think the overall being, the guy who had the most passing yards in the history of the NFL or the most touchdown passes in the history of the NFL. Once you get a taste for the gold is what's striving you, not, personal things. And I truly think for Patrick Mahomes, that is what he believes. And, you take a look at obviously Kelsey, and I don't think, and I think a lot of us probably thought, with where he is, in his career, obviously, where he is thought as thought of as one of the best tight ends in the NFL. Obviously, that is there. He's certainly won his rings. He has made a
Yeah.
boatload of money. Obviously, things seem to be going extremely well for him in his own personal life off the field. Not to mention whenever he decides to leave the NFL, he's going to have limitless opportunities as to what he's going to do.
He's set himself
Obviously,
up well. Yep.
I mean, already has basically the number one podcast in the entire nation with his brother.
Yep.
Could easily just step away, focus more on that, appearances, obviously, getting involved with branding, involved with garage beer. There's a million things waiting for
Mhm.
Kelsey. But the thing is, it's never going to be that. On the
Yeah.
field, and that's the biggest thing that players, when they leave, and even still, you become successful in your post football life, scoring touchdowns, knocking someone on their can, taking a big hit, but you still got the first down. You don't get that type of stuff in everyday life once you're outside of the sport,
It's
and
true.
it becomes something that you just ultimately miss. The Chiefs know that they probably have, and I'm just basing this maybe on Chris Jones and basically basing this on Kelsey, two huge factors here. It's maybe 2 to 3 years. And then even if Chris Jones is still here, maybe he's still not Chris Jones. Kelsey still believes he can perform at a high level, even though he doesn't necessarily have to, because I think there's other players on the Chiefs offense who are starting to step up, which can allow for
Yeah.
Kelsey to understand the natural progression of age and a little bit of slippage in overall athletic ability. But, the Chiefs, it's another couple of years and you're going to pay accordingly. And, there'll be a time we'll all be much older. I'll be much grayer. There'll be a time where the Chiefs are going to start to maybe like downsize, less money, working in some new players. But for right now, the Chiefs know that they, as far as the AFC is concerned, they are the top dog, and there's no reason to think, anything differently for at least a couple of seasons.